right. Great. Well, let's start kicking off. First and foremost, it's great to kick off this breaking room talks with what will be today a very, very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about some key lessons learned as well as a retrospective analysis and future analysis of building a multi-petabyte scale data platform using data lake. So the interesting thing about today's talk is that it will be done by both of us, myself and my colleague Olaf. So I represent today a data owner platform, basically serving a lot of data products to different departments, a lot of AI products. But then also we're going to have the central infrastructure perspective from my colleague Olaf. Do you want to say a quick intro as well?
Hello, am I audible? Yes, so my name is Olaf. I'm leading the data platform team. That is, we'll tell you a little bit more about what we do actually in a few minutes, but so we are basically responsible for the data processing and storage and governance core capabilities at Zalando.
Great. So we're going to have a really interesting perspective as this is basically two basically key alliances when it comes to the central services as well as then the mesh distributed areas. So we're going to be delving into a bit deeper. But before that, maybe to tell you a little bit more about us, about Zalando. So in Europe, I think it's quite a household name. I think outside, it's worth highlighting a bit more of what we do. We're one of the leading e-commerces in European fashion. So we're present in 25 markets across Europe. With a 15 billion euro GMV, around 50 million customers, about 1.8 million SKUs, 17,000 employees. So today, what you will be getting a lot about is how do we work around with this scale, right? Like, what does that mean in terms of scale around data, around governance, around compliance, and then what are some of the challenges that are faced from a central business function perspective versus kind of like a satellite providing domain-related use cases for data. The journey within Zalando has included a lot of evolution steps, a lot of exciting changes as we've basically accelerated into our growth. So starting on the early days in 2008, since then, of course, we've had a lot of major business milestones, including things like our IPO, our expansion into new areas, domains, markets, industries, as well as basically our most and latest platform strategy. But of course, this also comes with our growth from an infrastructure and technology standpoint. I think this is where it's going to become super interesting to see how Zalando has evolved within this journey. Of course, today we are in the Data and AI Summit from Databricks. And one of the key things that we're going to highlight is our growth within Databricks, especially as an early adopter, starting our journey in 2018 and really kind of growing as the organization has grown. A big also plug, we're also hiring. We're looking for ambitious practitioners. So please also check out some of the open roles as we would love to have you. And with that, let's actually dive into the meat of the presentation. I'm starting with the data infrastructure. So over to you, Olaf.
Thank you, Alejandro. Yeah, welcome everyone also from my side. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the data platform at Zalando. Click. So Zalando's data platform. So we are the central team that provides foundational capabilities around storage, processing, and data management at Zalando at scale, which means we have, the product team just told me, we have, including all the indirect dependencies, around 6,000 monthly active users, so which is more than 80% of our corporate employees, so excluding the warehouse workers, etc., which is something that makes me incredibly proud. We have a data lake of around 20 petabytes, so we are mostly on AWS, and most of this is actually Delta Lake, not all of it, but a big part. We have around 5,000 data products that are owned by 350 teams across all the business units at Zalando. So and I think this is one of the important themes that I'm going to talk a little bit also later on. We have a highly distributed network of data owners. So basically, what today is termed a data mesh, but we actually started a little bit earlier than the term And I'll also tell you a little bit about the story behind that. And Databricks plays a big role in this. Also, we have 350 teams active every month on Databricks, and I think this is around 1,000 active users. So also a big success and a very important part of our platform. But I actually would like to start a little bit with the ancient history. So I joined Zalando in 2012 as a data engineer. We were a small team. We were the business intelligence team. We were, I think, 20 people, 10 engineers, 10 analysts. We ran a big monolithic relational data warehouse. We had a few monolithic data source systems that we connected to, and we had an analytics platform. Life was not easy, but it was simple in the sense of the complexity of the infrastructure. So yeah, we had a consistent single source of truth. We had this warehouse. Everything worked relatively reliable as far as that goes in a startup. But also, of course, we were the people who were responsible for everything. So, and, of course, this slows things down. So the biggest complaint all the time was, yeah, so why isn't my pipeline not going to be built, my feature not going to be, et cetera, because there was always too much to be done for us. And so everything was slow to evolve and adapt. And it's interesting, of course, that so we were growing rapidly, 2014, the IPO. And it was not only in data, it was basically the whole tech landscape that was in a state of we needed to change something, right? So we couldn't keep up with the growth. We had our data center and we had, yeah, our monoliths. And so something happened. No, yeah. We entered the hypergrowth phase. So basically, so with a pretty bold move in 2015, our technology leadership decided we changed our approach to a lot of things, which meant we moved out of the data center to the cloud, to AWS. We re-architected or started to re-architect everything away from the monoliths towards microservices. And of course, also we changed the organizational structure. We had this, cross-functional teams and spread out the tech teams. And something similar happened in the data space. So we decided in 2016 also to say we really dissolve the central BI team and start to have data everywhere. So data and technology everywhere. We had to empower data teams in all the business units, which was great. So we had decentralized data ownership. Things moved fast. Yeah, data played an increasingly high importance important role for all the different parts of the organization. So this was great. Also, we saw a growing importance of the data lake that we introduced in 2016. So this was actually a very important part of this infrastructure. So we had down here the microservices. We had a central bus architecture based on Kafka. And we connected that to the data lake, which allowed us to basically keep up with the growth of the microservice space and actually have this in. But also, at the same time, other things popped up and people started, of course, to also introduce their own infrastructure components, their own approaches to doing things with data. And so we increasingly noticed, okay, we have a lack of common structure. We had reduced consistency, we had siloification, and all the bad things that you can imagine. And so the complexity of our data and our infrastructure increased in parallel. So that was our challenge. Yeah, so and one way to see this, so I like this picture. This is 1880 New York City. I don't know if you can see this from the back, but there's a lot of cables connecting more or less everything, which is, of course, inefficient and maybe dangerous, etc. But it's, what I like about this picture is also it's a sign of progress. Yeah, so it's a sign of technical innovation that actually is so attractive that people want to participate at all prices. And this is what we saw in the data space. Yeah? So people were empowered, everyone wanted to participate and do things with data. But we had the complexity challenge. And so next phase, product-focused data platform, which is basically when we realized we need to have more structure in this, and when we started to say, okay, let's take ownership again of the big infrastructure. So the company saw that the complexity is more than we can handle. And so we basically really consciously decided to have the data lake that was by then mostly Delta Lake also as the central data hub. And our ambition was and still is that we actually have everything that is analytically relevant go through the data lake. And so this is basically the main platform. There are still other systems, data warehouses. We have Starburst for SQL, access to that. We have processing with Databricks and Airflow. But stronger focus on integration. And the center of that is actually Delta Lake. So this was for us the platform that actually allowed us to have control and integration because it's of its openness and all the other great features. At the same time, we also increasingly realized that a platform is more than just individual components. So important for us was also to then build on that, right? So this centralization of the infrastructure allowed us to then ensure access controls and compliance with our regulatory requirements, to manage metadata, discoverability of data, have introduced productivity tooling for our users, ensure quality and observability, and also support users and data owners with insights about their data. But we kept what was important for the phase before, so which is the decentralized ownership of data. So we still, in the central teams, more or less don't own any data. There are few small exceptions, but in principle, everything is actually in the hands of the domain teams. How did we get there? Well, what was important for us on this path? And I would just like to highlight a few things. So the consolidation of the infrastructure, the consolidation of the data, and the move from core capabilities to platform services. Yeah, consolidating the infrastructure. I think you mentioned it already. So the data lake as a central hub was crucial for us to actually have one point of reference for everything, and the expectation that actually every peripheral system is actually connected to it. And then, of course, the focus on open standards and interoperability. And then migrations. So migrations are actually a big topic for us and our dear customers like Alejandro, so who have to suffer a little bit from that, and he will also maybe say a bit about that. Because of course, we half jokingly, I tell my team sometimes that we are also really in the migrations business, and the challenge is really to find ways to help our users to migrate without too much of the pain. And but in the end, it's what I really came to realize is that it's a capability. It's a capability to be able to migrate. It's a capability to actually redefine a platform as it lives and as it grows, etc. And this is also a bit the link to the photo, right? It's more like gardening. It's more like a continuous process than architecture and starting from something clean. What was also important for us is inverting convex law. So basically the law that actually your infrastructure tends to take the shape of your organization, and the insight that actually if you consciously design the organization in a way that resembles the architecture that you want to have, then this is a practically very powerful concept. And so we also saw a number of reorganizations where we actually said, okay, let's move teams together that had competing offers in the infrastructure space. And then they had to deal with the situation that they either have to maintain two stacks or converge on one. Yeah, and then educating the organization basically also about the prices that come with infrastructure complexity that are very easily overlooked. I have the same problem as Ali this morning. No, okay. Consolidating the data landscape. So yeah, so with all the empowerment of our data teams, who actually now were able to produce data on a very powerful platform, we also saw a rapid increase in the proliferation of data. Yeah, so we, of course, realized that in the end, just having a lot of data is not really what we want to have. We wanted great data, not necessarily big data. This chart is something that I find interesting. This is actually a real analysis that we regularly do that actually shows how many tables we need to serve a certain share of the queries we run on the platform. So this is now just a part of the full picture, but you can actually see that actually when we go roughly to say that if we, I don't know, let's say we have, making this up, we have 4,000 tables or so, part of that is not used at all, but actually to just serve, if we just had 700, we would still be able to serve 75% of the actual queries. This type of analysis is something that we very much rely on, that actually shapes also how we think about data governance, that we say we can actually partition this graph and say, okay, on the left side of the graph are the most important assets that we want to promote and that actually should be well documented and accessible and follow the highest quality standards, while on the right side the things are that are actually to be challenged and that where in the end also basically getting rid of them is probably a good idea. Then also, what is also important is to embrace data ops. This is also a continuous discussion that we have with our broader engineering community to actually bring the standards from software side reliability engineering to the data space by instrumenting data pipelines to the standards that we have in software engineering. We recently introduced also an incident management process directly for data incidents that relies on blameless postmortems, etc. And lastly, we also support the teams with transparency around the actual usage of their data assets, of the data that they own, their data products, and allow them to understand their work in context. And so also here, this is just a screenshot of a report that actually every data owning team gets from us that actually gives them insights, a number of KPIs around the cost and usage of their data products, but also of things that they have to do, so requirements that they still don't or do not fulfill, documentation tasks, etc. And this is also something that works very well in the cultural context of Zalando, where we put a high focus on actually ownership and decentralized decision making. And lastly, from core capabilities to platform services, what was so important for us when thinking about this platform is also we live in a highly regulated space, so we are not top regulated as a bank, etc., but still we are, for instance, as a platform provider, a relatively large platform provider in Europe, of course, bound to, let's say, antitrust regulation, for instance. So we are selling on our platform, but we also have other parties selling on our platform. See, people who are actually responsible for Zalando retail are not allowed to see data that belongs to other partners. We have GDPR and all these things, and the only way for us actually to be able to control this and to have compliance in the end by design is actually based on our platform. It also allows us to move away from this picture where you just have a broad toolbox of individual services. If you consolidate the platform with a more centralized approach, then you also have better chances to really go into a product mindset and say, okay, what is the actual job that the user has to do, and then optimize and automate and support them in their daily work. And lastly, FinOps. So for us, and I guess for many of you also, data is a cost topic. So especially when you are in a highly scalable cloud environment, this is something that really also matters from a business perspective. So what helps us to actually, when working in a centralized platform, is to have an end-to-end view, and also allows us to give a full picture, so an end-to-end representation of both the value created and the cost created by certain pipelines. And so to wrap up, basically, the journey from the relatively simple and limited foundations to the hyper-growth phase, now to what one may call a product-focused platform. It's basically how I see it. It's really something that is about handling the space between scale and complexity. We started at a stage where scale was low, complexity was low, then to an explosion of both scale and complexity, but to an extent where the complexity is actually threatening the growth and threatening the scalability. And by moving towards centralization of the infrastructure, by keeping the decentralized ownership, we, I think, are on a good path to actually have the scalability while keeping complexity in check.
All right. So now with that, let's then dive into the domain, right? So you heard it from the perspective of, yeah, basically the infrastructure, the central provider. So now from our perspective is, how do we basically serve data? How basically we align to the business to be able to service the needs of Zalando, right? To make us what is, ultimately not a cloud provider or a SaaS service provider. We are ultimately an e-commerce, right? And our business is fashion. So the technology that we bring, it really is to deliver on those areas. Now, the specific domain, and to give you maybe like a flavor of how we operate, from this 20 petabytes that was kind of like mentioned, so we are responsible for about 1 petabyte of this data. So this is primarily on supply and demand data, right? So making it accessible to a broad range of areas across Zalando as curated data products. And we're going to dive into what that actually means in practice. So this is data that is not just consumed within basically our business unit, right? So we're a relatively large organization with multiple different departments from a technical perspective, but we serve the broader business, right? And similar to how Olaf mentioned, how much we love migrations, we're going to talk about basically like the opportunities that are open with, basically ambitions towards a scalable platform, particularly to serve our different stakeholders. And I think you have to remember that when it comes to serving data, this is still providing, a service that needs to be, kept up to date, that needs to have the quality in place, that ultimately, as part of this, migrations, needs to have the right communication, right? So that suddenly you don't have like an outage to realize that, a data set was being deprecated. As part of this, so it's not just data, it's also machine learning systems. So we have basically use cases that require not just the data itself, but actually an intelligence layer of machine learning on top of that. As part of this, we have a broad range of different use cases across causal inference, across forecasting, across NLP. And the data ops is core of this, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. And indeed, as we are basically providing and making available these data products, it's also important that we are making use of the infrastructure that is being provided, right? Because this is in constant evolution. It's not like we just reach a situation where we're just happy and done with the infrastructure that we're using. We have a lot of value that we're getting from some of our strategic partners through the central services themselves, as well as then perhaps tooling that we bring within the department that may not be central Zalando. Now, the way that we were able to kind of adopt this, so going into this sort of decentralized data mesh perspective, what we want to do is also to lower the complexity at a global scale, right? And for that, it's basically adopting best practices that specialize into the area where we operate, but also align to the broader Zalando engineering strategy, data strategy, cloud strategy, et cetera, et cetera. What that looks like is creating basically this layered architecture across basically the data products that we service, right? This allows us to also have an intra-department or intra-business unit specialization, right? Like a data platform team that makes these curated data products available, reporting teams that make the dashboards available, planning teams around that, then the machine learning and applied science departments, et cetera, et cetera. But indeed, this gives us separation of domains, right? So we have all of our source data products that we consume, right? To make them actual, I guess the more common terminology would be your bronze, silver, gold data. So that is basically an analogy that you can paint towards this picture. And of course, then the curated data products that we provide, we want to think them as actual products, right? Products that require like iterative development, agile methodologies, product management, as opposed to purely treated as projects and as basically like ephemeral assets that, suddenly are just a cost to the business, but more they're an opportunity. So the layer architecture, indeed, this provides you an idea of our data and BI, right? This is what the orange shows. We then have this intelligence layer, basically where we have the ETL for not just data processing and ETL, but also for feature engineering and machine learning model training, right? So that's kind of like the intelligence layers. That's also where we have more specialization towards our applied science. We have also standardization across the organization on our orchestrator. So it is a commonly known thing that we use Airflow for most of our orchestration requirements. This is also consistently across the board and integrating with other platforms like Databricks. And then, of course, not everything is technology. It's also important to make sure that we are adopting best practices in the process, right? This includes things that include education from a product perspective to our consumers, but also really driving that clarity in terms of ownership, right? Like, what does it mean to own a product? What even is a data product, right? Is it a table? Is it a compilation of tables? Is it like a hierarchical sort of like, relationship between KPIs? Like, what is a data product, and how do we educate our stakeholders of what a data product is, right? Similarly, communication during basically migrations, the operations of the data products themselves, etc. Now, some of the lessons learned, and I think this is the meat of this session, as we can actually delve to each of them into a lot of detail with use cases that we've seen in the past. But some of the things that we've seen is that when it comes especially with migrations, it's important to not just think about them as like running a treadmill, right? Because ultimately that approach means that you're always going to be chasing something, right? And instead of that, what is important is to start looking from it, instead of moving away from a particular technology, is more towards like adopting value through a different infrastructure adoption, etc. And I think this means mapping this short-term roadmap with the long-term ambition, and really being able to align what does it mean to have basically technology, central technology mandates, like a migration, but so that your VP cares about them when it's domain specific, right? And this is some of the challenges that tend to appear when you move into a mesh architecture, right? Like the fact that the domain leadership may have different objectives than actually the central technology ambitions. The second one is indeed translating that, and for the central teams to help us, domain consumers, providers of data, to have the tooling to be able to have this outcome mindset, right? Whenever we go and talk about our legacy central on-prem migration, that we don't go and tell our leadership that it's just purely a central X migration. It's an ambition to actually reduce our footprint and costs to contribute to bottom line, right? To a certain extent, being something that considered across all of the different domains brings more value than actually just talking about it as purely my own organization. Another thing that is key, and one of the reasons why we're in this conference, is particularly on the strategic relationships and partnerships with our vendors, right? So the question here is ultimately not just what is our strategy within Zalando from a technology ambition, but also what is the strategy from some of our vendors, like Databricks, right? Like, what are they trying to achieve? What is their sort of like, ambitions for the next 5 years? And what are some of those things that actually align between both of us so that we can make big bets and verbalize those big bets at a strategic level? And then finally, understanding that not everything is purely a tooling gap, right? Like, indeed, a lot of the times there is a tooling gap, right? You're missing a particular database or a particular service. Indeed, that tends to be the case, but what is often overlooked is that there is also, a lot of the times, a best practice and process gap. And many of the times, actually, the gap is larger on the latter than on the former, right? And the solution is not purely a technological one. And I think we're going to cover the prime example of this, which is indeed some of the trends we're seeing. So one of the examples here is this ambition towards like a golden path, right? Like, what does it mean for us to get to the stage where we want to be in relation to a decentralized, mesh sort of organization when it comes to data ownership, but that we're actually shooting toward the same direction? Why is it important? Is because the tooling and ecosystem of data is only growing and growing faster, right? So, I mean, even if you squint your eyes, you probably wouldn't be able to see all the logos here, but these are basically a lot of the tools in the data ecosystem. So actually, this is taken from this ecosystem called I think it's Machine Learning, AI, and Data. So it's acronym for MAD, the MAD landscape. But indeed, right, like if you then allow all of the teams to just, pick and choose whatever they want, you end up with this same kind of like map across the organization, which is not really where you also want to be. There's no knowledge sharing, there's no kind of like ability to exchange expertise, and there is like lack of interoperability even across systems when you want to kind of even share data. What we want to move towards is this concept of this architectural blueprint, right? It's like also, we don't want to be fully restricted, like, being told exactly like what is the particular use case for something that maybe specialized in our domain, but at least having the high-level contracts so that we can align on what is expected from a particular component, right? And I think this is then the conversation that allows us as domains, data owners, to have with our central teams to be able to understand what are the areas that require flexibility, what are the areas that don't, right? The second one is, really evolving in our data ops maturity. Because when it comes to operations, and I think probably many of you will relate, it's slightly more nuanced than when it comes to software operations. And what I mean by that is that when the website goes down, or when the purchase, service goes down, the impact to the customers is direct, right? Like, you know how long the website has been offline, you know how many perhaps sales were not converted. But what happens if suddenly your weekly trade domain forecasting stops working, right? Or if your kind of insights for your internal sort of steering stop working, or some KPIs are not delivered, right, on time. So in that, basically, it is assessing what is the impact for internal use cases, right? And that is where it becomes more nuanced. This is something that we want to also grow, is how do we deal with data incidents, and how are they specialized in comparison with traditional software incidents, right? What does it mean for us to have SLOs? What does it mean to then introduce things like data quality? To what extent data quality is necessary, et cetera, et cetera. Especially when it's a mesh architecture, this becomes best practices that, in traditional software you tend to have, but in data perhaps it is starting to be adopted. The second one I think was already covered is especially being a Europe-based organization. So we are subject to a lot of compliance and regulatory regulation. So across not just data, but also AI. And that really pushes us to think what is then the needs that we need to have from a metadata perspective, right? Like a metadata management, metadata lifecycle, discovery, governance, et cetera, primarily because the more you want to provide the domain users more flexibility and more power, the more tooling and privacy by design that then would be required, right? Because then otherwise you would have to be making sure that all of the domains are also experts in that regulatory compliance, which is not feasible. The other thing to mention as well is I know that AI, machine learning, has become it is certainly a key topic of conversation, and it's no different here, right? And the shift that I want to highlight here as a trend is the shift from the concept of machine learning models to data-centric machine learning systems, right? You no longer productionize a model, right? Like you productionize a model in context of a larger system, particularly being data-led and data-related system. And the reason why I'm putting this, so this is basically the architecture for Meta, Facebook's search. So you can see that in one side is basically the indexing, the documents, building kind of the embeddings. On the left is basically the real-time search itself, right? Like how it uses the models. You don't have a single model there, right? You don't have a single, data step in there. You have a full flow that involves every single step. And the final thing is, with all of these trends in mind, embracing these product methodologies becomes key. But it's an open question, right? It's like, what does it mean to have a product manager for a data team, right? What does it mean to have a cross-functional team in the data infrastructure space? Like, what does it mean to have kind of agile methodologies in a space where more traditionally it is run by projects, right? So I think it's something that is important to highlight. And then just to wrap up, these are some of the trends. This is now also some of the value that we've been able to unlock and some of the things that we're currently also looking at. So yeah, like the ones that are probably worth highlighting is starting mainly with the AI itself, AI and data governance. So right now with the kind of introduction of the AI Act, we have to actually think about compliance, not just from a data perspective, but a data and model perspective. And this requires actually thinking about how do we consolidate the concept of compute and data, right? How do we version that? How do we ensure reproducibility of that? And how can we benefit from our central service providers to be able to fulfill those needs? This then unlocks the ability for us to really adopt cutting-edge technology in a way that is effective and efficient, right? That we don't have to go through a massive uplifting if we want to run a small POC with XYZ large language model provider. We have had some successes within Zalando releasing Gen AI use cases, like our most recent fashion assistant. Basically, you can converse and ask, fashion queries to get like a suggested, attire, but indeed to actually like take it to the next level. This is also not just on customer-facing use cases, but actually on back office value, right? Like things like predictive supply and demand, forecasting using, deep learning models, foundation models, that there's now a trend, an exciting trend in forecasting, but also consolidating that supply and demand in ways that, can be more advanced than the traditional approach. Then the next one is intelligent steering mechanisms. So this is actually, even supporting our domain experts to be able to actually leverage these technologies, right? Ultimately having a domain expert plus AI or domain expert plus insights, as opposed to like looking purely at the automation. Integrated customer insights. So I think now this is something that a lot of people would relate as well, is how do we actually look at our customer data in ways that allows us to really extract insights that go beyond just further acquisition, like really retention, right? It's like what actually do we need to invest on from a data perspective to be able to get there. And the final thing is really going one level deeper with 50 million users, right? Like we can't provide like an exactly different targeted, tailored experience to every single one of them. But having said that, with the advancements in ML, in data, in infrastructure, we now can explore new ways. So those are some initial ones, and I think with that gave us kind of like a good ground. So I'll probably invite once again my colleague Olaf to come on board so that we can take some questions. But indeed, thank you very much for your time, and if we have some time, we'll take some questions.